Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to the Arcserve presentation for replication high availability, and we'll also do a bit of a product walkthrough as well. My name is Chris Evans. I'm a principal consultant for Arcserve, and we've got a few things to get through in this presentation, so you can bear with me, but I will want to talk about, first of all, who is Arcserve. For some people, it might be a new name, but we're certainly a global company. Arcserve itself has been in the environments with people. It's been in production. It's been in environments for many years. And we now have a new global company based in Minneapolis in the United States. But what it means for you is that we have a number of people, partners, to serve you, the customer, in ensuring that you have a great experience with data protection throughout your environment. We've got a fabulous 24/7 technical support, and this product, as I said earlier, it's been around for a long time, and it continues to provide customers and partners alike with data storage protection for many years to come. Now that we're our own truly independent global company, that gives us a number of factors that we can truly deliver to yourself as the customer or as our partner. So in addition to the solutions, it means that we can be a lot more innovative, responding a lot faster to changes in the industry or changes in your own environment needed. That, of course, leads to being 100% focused on your environment as well as the data protection and recovery market as a whole. That, with those solutions we're then able to provide, it gives us a very strong backing in terms of being able to continue financial and operational. And that's very important whenever you're choosing a software vendor to work with, is that you want to ensure that not only have they been around for a long time, but they will continue to do so. And that's something that Arcserve certainly has been able to provide over the past years and the many years to come. So with the who are we, who is Arcserve, etc. out of the way, let's go through some of the product overview. So there's a few screens I'm going to go through, which is a little bit of this presentation before I get to a live hands-on view in a lab that I've got running. So with Arcserve High Availability, which is our focus on this presentation, it's the high availability itself is about ensuring that your application, your databases, your data is continuously protected, and it's also made available for ensuring that your environment, your work, your business, your enterprise, whatever that may be to you, continues operations 24/7 by 365. So for that point, Arcserve High Availability, it protects a number of items in your environment, from a file server to applications and databases such as Exchange and Oracle. Hypervisors are protected. There's always the support for physical to physical, physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, and virtual to physical. There's support, of course, where you've got direct storage, SAN storage, NAS, iSCSI storage. There's the centralized management, reporting, alerting, a global dashboard, if you wish, and as well as there's a built-in feature with replication across a WAN, where we'll detect when the data is to be replicated or made highly available across a WAN, and we optimize that automatically. There is further enhancement capability for that WAN configuration as well, if so needed. On the centralized management, nowadays it's pretty important. You don't want to have several different consoles that you want to go to. You need this console to start this or stop that. You need to go to this console to get statistics or reporting, and this one to see about history. So what we do is that with an overview page, that's your one-stop shop, so to speak, where you can see what the scenarios for replication, the high availability is doing. There's a report center. There's that, so that centralized management reporting, it's all in the one location, all in the one console. It's all based upon browser, so whether you want to use Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, that sort of thing, that's all supported in this product as well. We're also able to, one of the things is that if you've got various groups within your business, such as HR or finance, or maybe you're a multi-corporate national running international business or something, you want to group by countries, by businesses. We certainly have that ability in there where you can group those scenarios for your replication or high availability. So individually, each of the scenario can fail over or perform its task, or as a group they can do that. An example, for example, might be SharePoint. So you can individually fail over a web server, the application management server, or the back-end SQL database or cluster, or as a group, all three of those can fail over to the disaster recovery site or the bunker, whichever may be the case. That's an important feature because you do have granularity in there in maintaining group management. You certainly don't want to be able to managing 100 separate scenarios, but if there's commonality in there, you can group them together and manage them and ensures that the dependency and the consistency and the integrity for that application or database is maintained. One of the really important features that I like is the CDP, or the Data Rewind capability. And it's much like, in some ways, you want to rewind back to that favourite spot on the movie and listen to the sound or watch the visual again. The same thing can be done here. An application use case would be you're about to apply a hot fix or a service pack. So you'll run you'll put an assured recovery or a bookmark in place as a checkpoint to say, all right, at this point in time, everything would have failed over and would have worked. So I'm going to save that now as a point in time, and I'll go ahead and perform my hot fix, my patch, my service pack, whatever the update might have been. That way, if something goes wrong, you can then rewind back to that known point in time you knew everything was good. And then you've got that rewind capability. So that protects you from things like virus, malware attacks, if there's any data corruption, any sort of misconfiguration from a fat finger of a DNS server or something like that. So that's something very useful and is a good use case as well. Disaster recovery, nowadays, there's many of the time I travel, and one of my questions I always ask my clients, partners, or the audience is that show of hands, who's got a disaster recovery plan? Have you tested it recently and did it work? And the last two questions are often a problem because many people have disaster recovery plans, but they don't test them, and sometimes when they do, well, it doesn't work. But it's better to find out beforehand if your disaster recovery plan is going to be functional. So to that intent, we have an assured disaster recovery testing capability where you can leave the production servers running and you can use the assured recovery piece at any time. You can schedule it, or at any time, to test, all right, if I had to fail over, would have Exchange launched? Would SQL or Oracle come up? Would my user shares still be available? And that can be brought online and you can test it without affecting production at all. So straight away you know, all right, so if I failed over today, everything would have worked. And also what you can do from that assured recovery test is then you can take a snapshot. And that snapshot can then be used as a fallback or as a means of data protection. You can back that snapshot up. You can mount it or you can back it up. So with the disaster recovery testing, this means you can determine that if I had a disaster right now, would it have worked? Yes, that would have come online. And you would have been in a little checkbox, yep, the disaster recovery was tested. So you can sort of rest a little bit easier. Of course, if you want to, you can also utilize, if you're using high availability, you can perform a switch over, and that's certainly recommended at least once a month, is to do the assured recovery plan, the disaster recovery test, or that high availability switch over to determine, yes, it would have worked, how long did it take, how much of a WAN did I need, all those sort of aspects that you'll need to critically plan if there is a disaster, so you know in advance how long it's going to take before everything comes back up. One of the unique features with the high availability is that we have a full system high availability feature for Amazon Cloud to EC2. That means you can take a physical or a virtual machine and you can replicate that up to an Amazon EC2 instance. So not only, if you want to look at it this perspective, you've got your production machines running, you might have a local failover capability, you may or may not have a bunker or a disaster recovery site failover, but now you can add it up into the cloud as well, so that you've got pretty much a lot of use case, worst case disasters. You've got a local outage, it fails over locally. You've got a complete power outage locally. Then you've got a choice. It can either run it on the cloud or it can run it from your DR, your disaster recovery bunker site. So in this case, with the Amazon cloud, we replicate the entire system up to an Amazon EC2. You do need, of course, to have your own Amazon account, because you will be asked for the access ID, the secret ID, the keys, etc., like that. And then which instance do you want to use? And of course, the timing means that if something happens and you need to switch over or fail over to the Amazon Cloud EC2 instance, it's a case of what's your connectivity? Is it public internet? Is it a virtual private connection? Whatever your configuration is to Amazon, how long does then Amazon EC2 instance take to bring it up? Well, that's pretty quick. But one of the things we always encourage, if you're going to use the cloud, certainly test it on a regular basis to ensure that you know what the timing's going to be. Your local failover might take you just minutes. To the bunker site might take you, say, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on your WAN connectivity and how much data and how long it takes to mount that information store, for example. And to the cloud is what's your connectivity. So you certainly want to be thinking about testing that. I mentioned earlier about the WAN optimization. So when the master and the replica, the production and the disaster recovery site are talking to each other, we have an engine which does all the work, and that uses TCP port 25,000 by default. So as long as the ports are open and they're talking, we have this transmission. Now, if you're using a WAN, the engines automatically detect the WAN speed, throughput, latency, optimization, etc., and set that in a configuration file. We do give you, of course, full reporting on the bandwidth and the transmission rates, so then you're able to make changes, for example, to the TCP send-receive buffer size. That gets a little technical, I know, and certainly our support people are more than ready, willing, and able to help you 24/7 to be able to change that configuration to improve the throughput. So we certainly have that ability to optimize it further. Of course, part of that WAN optimization, we have to talk about firewalls, whether that be NAT support, and that, of course, is fully supported as well. You can do this between two different subnets, across a WAN, whatever the case may be, is that as long as the engines talk to each other, everything works. There's also a unique feature in there is an assessment mode. And if you were unsure about your daily rate of change, for example, you could run the assessment mode for 12 hours, 24 hours, then stop that scenario, stop that assessment mode, and then review the report, and it would have said to you, over this period of time, so much data changed, and that's how much would have replicated or been used for high availability. So you could then plan accordingly for your daily rate of change, and then adjust your WAN configuration, or even if that becomes a little bit too outside that realm, then you can adjust the WAN optimization that we use between our engines. Of course, when you're talking about going across a WAN or data leaving your network, your production environment, we've got to talk about encryption. We do have the encryption feature. This is encryption during transfer, or if you like, in motion. So this is not about once it's at rest. This is in motion. And for that reason, we have 128-bit encryption up to 256-bit. It's configurable. You can choose the level of encryption. And if you do want to use encryption, we always recommend at the very least using 128-bit SSL between the engines so that there's no eavesdropping or whatever the case may be. So we certainly support encryption. That's not often a question that does come up, but when it does, it's fully supported. Part of replication high availability, well, in a user case, you've got to be able to talk about bare metal recovery. And that's the ability from you've already switched over or you're failed over, e.g., remember I was talking about the Amazon EC2 instance earlier. So with that in mind, you've failed over, you've switched over. Now, what are you going to do about the production side? That server is toast. the CPU is dead, or a motherboard, or daughter board, riser board, a card, something's died, you've got to replace that. Well, and sometimes it might be just as easy as bringing it back up online, reinstalling the engine, doing the replication. Well, we do have a bare metal recovery feature, which can simplify the process to a great deal, where all you need is to create a bare metal recovery image, which is an ISO. If it's a virtual machine, mount the ISO, or if it's a physical machine, load it into your DVD tray and boot it off that. And from there, we have a little Arcserve wizard comes up, asks you a few questions. Make sure it gets an IP address on the network, engines talk, data is replicated back to the machine. When it reboots, it's all back again. So that gives you a fairly seamless failover switchover from whether you're doing a bookmark or whether it's complete bare metal recovery. All the data that's since changed since that failover will now be replicated back, and then within a very short time, your production node's back in business again. All these use cases I was talking about, of course, leads to that return on investment, and this, of course, leads us down the path of recovery point and recovery time. But I just want to focus is that with just Arcserve alone, you've got a fully functional means for ensuring your business continuity as well as a disaster recovery plan. And as a reminder, there's the data rewind, there's the WAN automation, as well as optimization, and the automated disaster recovery testing. It can be push button. You can even do ad hoc scheduling for it on your own from there. So a couple of other use cases you can see here. There's some animation on these slides as we're going through it. And it's just to show that something happens to a server in your primary site, be it physical or virtual. There's, with the heartbeat and the monitoring, something's gone wrong. Send out alerts. There, I can't connect to the production node anymore, and then I can switch over. We like to always recommend initially when you're deploying the product to create a manual configuration process, so it's not automated. We do that because then you can step through. Did it replicate? Yes. Did it switch over? Yes or no. So then you've got the ability to, there's not a great big configuration. It's just like, okay, it replicated, that's good. Oh, it didn't fail over because there was a DNS issue. Oh, I didn't know I had a DNS issue. You correct those sort of things. So whenever you're talking to the pre-sales or engineers or in support, it's always worthwhile as a trial, which you can get from arcserve.com, or if you've purchased the product, is to always take those manual steps and step through them, because you'll probably learn some more about your environment. So again, looking at the physical to physical, physical to virtual, the virtual to virtual, it doesn't really matter, is that the Arcserve replication high availability can protect your environment, and as I said earlier, is that to ensure that disaster recovery at the bunker site, going on up to Amazon, EC2, the cloud, whichever it might be, is that we're maintaining that your business continues to operate. So that's something certainly worthwhile to keep in mind, whether it's you're doing a local failover, a WAN failover, or going to the cloud. We have that centralized reporting management. We have the data rewind capability, etc., etc., etc. I will mention that this presentation is, of course, recorded. So if you didn't quite see a screen or you needed to read something a bit more, you can always pause and rewind and go back and reread or rehear what I had to say. Off-site replication. This is again, still the WAN optimization side, but it certainly, there's a little bit of segue in here into unified data protection. So Arcserve Replication High Availability can be a standalone product, or it can be used in conjunction with Unified Data Protection, which is a backup product. It uses images, takes snapshots, and stores them on disk. Those backup sessions in turn can be protected by tape. But a unique feature, we've added the Arcserve Replication High Availability capability into UDP so that the recovery point servers where the deduplication occurs can replicate between each other locally across a WAN. If you're an MSP, a partner, this might be of interest to you to look as well, where you can look at the service from a client perspective, where they've got their production environment protected, they have local failover, they can fail over to their disaster recovery bunker site, and or they can fail over to your own site where you can host them as a service for the client as an extra disaster recovery step. The disaster recovery testing, I just want to highlight just a little bit further on this, because I may not have explained it fully earlier on, but it's complete, it doesn't affect your production environment at all. So you can, what it'll do is you've got your production server replicating to the standby server. Let's pick Exchange, for example. Mailboxes are being updated, data's being transferred, and then you want to decide as a disaster recovery test, part of the assured recovery, is that you can initiate an assured recovery test, and you can watch the Exchange server services on the Replica side. Those services come online, and you can perform your own tests. And none of that's affected production at all. Production continues on. Any changes that have occurred are being spooled to disk. So we use how we record all the changes, we spool it to disk. They're all being put on the disk. Once you've finished with your assured recovery testing, when you release that, all those changes come back again from the spool and transmitted across the LAN or the WAN to the standby server. So you can fully automate that. So you can set that up to occur once a week, once a month. It sends you an alert via email, or you can check in the central management console for the reports, etc. But if that was the case and you had a need for compliance and you had a question from the auditors, how often do you do disaster recovery testing, you can then furnish them with the emails or the reports. This is how often we do it, and this is the results. So all this, part of the thing too is, all right, well, what if I've got my physical and my replica, or it could be many physicals to one replica, or a physical to multiples. You can cascade with this. One of the things, though, is that, well, I need to take my production server down. I've got to replace the network card. I've got to update a patch or a service pack. And to be sure, I want to take it down. So probably first thing you'll do is, for example, on the replica, you might stop the replication high availability services, and you might bring the application online on the replica and test it there first, if you like. But what we'd like you to do is that you've got a scenario running for high availability between your database, and what you can do is there's a host maintenance mode, and what that indicates is that you want to take the production offline and address it. But what will happen there is that the replica then knows that there's nothing wrong with the production node, so it doesn't switch over or fail over itself, which is a unique feature, because that might be an accident waiting to happen. So you just tell the scenario, I'm taking the production server offline to fix it. The scenario stays running in a paused state, so to speak. You perform the task on the production node, bring it back online, it communicates back to the replica, and then any changes that have occurred on the production server since the scenario was paused, then they're replicated. So that becomes pretty convenient in terms of, like, most of us either have patch Tuesdays, or we perform these tasks on Saturdays or Sundays when there's not such a great activity. So you've got this feature where you can address the maintenance of that production, or the replica server, by the way. It can work both ways, and address the maintenance and bring it back online. And there's a lot less exposure. If something should happen to your production server, of course, and it's like, well, this is going to take longer than the 2 or 3 hours I planned, maybe I should fail over. You can initiate that failover, of course, and bring the replica online. So we kind of we try to plan for everything. One of the unique features, too, is development of patch testing, and a lot of people don't think about this, but, for example, SQL Server, you want to test the database. Well, you can mount it on the production side or the replica side, and you can test it there and see would it have worked or wouldn't it have worked. Certainly things like, right, once a month I need to extract some reports from SQL. Well, in that case, you could run those off the replica. So you left the production running as it is, untouched, and you can make a replica your means of getting those reports out, or whatever it is. sometimes the reports can be quite lengthy, take up a lot of resources. So there's another use case is the development and patch testing. And I certainly mentioned that earlier, is that why try a service pack on a production server when you're not quite sure it may work, or you've noticed in that some of the user forums there's some comments about it? We'll try it on the replica side first. If it works, great. Then you can fail back and apply it to the production machine. If it doesn't, well, now you know you were glad you didn't do it on the production server. You can fix up the replica and then resume that scenario back again. This last one I want to talk about is there's a complement to SAN replication. So by the SAN replication, there's a lot of hardware vendors have capabilities where the SAN disk arrays can replicate between each other. So this is a further complement to it. So instead of just relying on one means of replication, e.g. the hardware, you can also utilize the software as a means to complement that SAN replication. In other words, you've got more than one way to recover. You're not relying upon one mechanism alone. So not only do you concern about, well, if the SAN fails, all right, I still have a capability here, but also protects against application failures. And like everything else, you've got the physical to physical, physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, and virtual to physical. I like to say that very quickly. As well as the central management reporting, the testing, etc. You've all got that, those use cases I talked about prior. You've got all those capabilities in there. So think of this also as being a complement to SAN replication. And as I said, you've got you're not relying upon one sole mechanism. Now you've got a couple. As you might find that one will work in one instance, but in the other one it didn't work. There may have been a unique power problem just on the SAN itself, or somebody tripped over a cable or something. So we never know what's going to happen. If we plan for the worst, we can expect the best. A couple of case studies. So some of these are rather intriguing. We have some things that we can talk about and some things we can't. But one of the more unique things was a large physical to virtual migration with the US Air Force 45th Space Wing based in Florida. They had a challenge about migrating from physical to the virtual environment. They didn't want server outages that would have provided problems with certain service level agreements, etc. So what they did is they, using Arcserve Replication between the two sites in combination with a backup, because they wanted to make sure that, well, if something happens during the replication, we want to be sure we've got everything backed up, we've got our bare metal recovery capabilities, etc., etc. So they did that approach of what if happens, let's make sure this is covered. And while the migration perhaps might for some see it took a long time, like 3 months, there was a lot of resources that had to occur here, not only just hardware and software, but people resources as well as transport things, etc. There's more information about this can be available from, if you want to contact one of our partner resellers, or the partners contact your partner manager, we can tell you certainly more about this. But in addition to the cost saving, they didn't have to retrain the staff at all, which is one of their unique things that they favoured, as well, this is something we can use right now, and later, even after the migration, we continue to use so. At the very bottom there's a quote from the manager of CSR's Enterprise Networks, and Glenn said they also they're a slightly different environment, but at CSR they had a similar thing when they needed to go from physical to virtual. And I don't think theirs actually took 3 months. I think it was a little shorter than that. But they certainly took their time as well, making sure that all the I's and T's were crossed and dotted. Another one was a hotel and resort. They had their problems about the emails. And for many environments, email is their business. So for some customers, it's their web servers, their SQL databases. For others, it is their emails, taking those travel bookings, etc. So what they did is, using Arcserve Replication, protected their email as well as providing human resources, finance, and file server data. So it wasn't just the email that they used to protect with Arcserve Replication high availability, they also spread it throughout their environment. I mentioned earlier about our fabulous technical support. It's 24/7. There's even a chat, which a lot of people don't realize. but you can click on the chat icon and chat live with a support engineer 24/7. We have a fantastic online knowledge base if you need to know information in regards to how do I do this, how do I do that, and knowledge base is there to help you out, as well as our documentation. It's also Arcserve.com is where you go to get the live trial information from. So we some things that I forgot to turn off. That's all right. For some of us internally, we all know who Scott Waters is. So in addition to support, patches, documentation, there's the certified device list. There's some software compatibility. We even have online training videos as well as documents. So definitely Arcserve.com and click on the technical support link. So just very quickly as a solution overview, just as a reminder, protecting your production environment to a local, a bunker, or across the cloud is that something happens to the physical or virtual machine, you can fail it over. At this point, had this been live, I could have taken some time to answer some questions. You've probably already got some questions of your own, so certainly if you do, I highly encourage you to either reach out to our support people, to one of the partner you're dealing with, the Arcserve partner, to get those questions, or the partners if you've got questions, to go to your partner account manager and get any of those questions addressed. As always, these presentations always, do you support this, do you support that, etc. How do I? And for most of those, we have a great software product matrix that you can look up to see what operating systems, platforms, environments, applications, databases, etc. we support. You can also, at that support side, also see our documentation. So it's like, okay, that's how I do this, or that's how I set this up. So I think my next slide's a little bit of a legal thing, but what I'm going to do now is switch over to my lab, and what I've prepared for you here, this is the scenario manager. And there is an overview page, which I'm not sure if I have displayed or not, but I'm going to focus on the scenario manager. And I've got a couple of scenarios in here. So how do you create a scenario? Well, scenario, new. You can select what group you want it to apply to, for example. And I'm not actually going to complete this, but I'll get quite a fair ways along. Here's all the different scenario types. Now this is all GUI driven. There's no scripts you have to worry about or anything like that. You just pick the appropriate GUI driven template that you want. So as you can see here, we've got file servers, Exchange, Oracle, SQL, Internet server, Microsoft IIS servers. There's RHA control service. This is our product where you've got that centralized management reporting node. We can replicate that entire node to a standby node, so if something happens to the central management node itself, it can stand in. The control service itself can be stopped and not running. The engines, as long as they're talking to each other, they will continue to function. So the control service can be stopped or shut down. The engines are running, your replication high availability is still good. We also support Microsoft Hyper-V, SharePoint. There's replication between vCenter. The Microsoft Dynamics, CRM servers. There's the full system I was talking about for Windows. Custom application. Something in here that we don't support, pick the custom application. That'll ask you for the server names, the application you want to protect, the service, etc., etc. Arcserve disk to disk and UDP, so you can replicate those backup sessions. And there's also central host-based or agentless backup. So for example, if I chose SQL Server, put in a high availability, and include the integrity testing. This is where I can push a button, test if the replica would have come online without any errors, take a snapshot, and then I've just done a little disaster recovery test. I choose next. I can give the server name, whatever it might be, SQL Server test, whatever it can be from here. I can either type in the host name or the IP address, or I can select this grey button here, and this does a DNS cache lookup, and then I'm able to pick the node that I want to utilize in this particular scenario. I can check the engines, When I do that, it goes and connects to those two nodes. Is it already installed? Yes or no? You can see the versions, the login account, if it's started or not. If one of these came up without being installed, I can install it from right here. I can install it from the CD DVD, I can install it here, or there is a remote tool capability for remote deployment as well. So that's looking good. I can choose next. What it's doing now is that it's now going to connect to the master and find all the SQL information on there, the instances, the databases, where all the logs are. And you can see here they've got these little checkboxes here. So if I didn't want that database, I can uncheck it. You can see it all grays out. I want that database, so it all comes back. So you can select which database or instances. In this case, this is just a single instance, but you can choose multiple instances or databases. I've then got some properties I might want to pick out. What sort of a replication? I can do online, scheduling, or periodic. There's some other optional settings in here. I don't have a great deal of time to cover all these, but these are certain we can go in a live trial or with a full demo later on. Notifications, I can turn them off or on. I can do it by email, write to an event log, whatever the case may be. If I choose the next, excuse me, master and replica properties. As a reminder, spool is to disk. You can change that default location, and certainly we like to encourage people to have at least 15% of disk space free. So if you're going to replicate 100 gigabytes, that means you should have at least 15 gig of free disk space for the initial scenario. Once it's running and replication high availability is in place, you don't need to have that free all the time. We can, it checks it. Of course, this is always the fun part, will it work or not? If there are errors, such as it's already in another scenario, there's a problem with DNS, IP addresses, host names, all this information appears here in the properties. So I'm just going to cancel out of that before we go much further. Here's something I had running earlier. I created a SQL Server group, a SQL 2012 replications running here. And there's this graphic representation over here on the right-hand side, which has the active node, and there's the standby node. And we can just have a quick peek in here, is that for the root directories, this is the information about the SQL Server. It's a single instance. There's a couple of things you see are excluded, tempdb and templog. We exclude those by default. We always encourage, of course, that if you want to protect those, to a full 100% disaster recovery checkbox with the auditors, then probably either look to using Arcserve Backup or UDP to protect those files. But very quickly, the properties in here, there's the replication that's occurring. The event notification is on, but I haven't got it going to the email. There's no script, and I'm not writing to the event log. The email just uses standard SMTP. And you can see the notification is just those three mechanisms. The high availability properties for switchover, there's what's the host that's going to switch over to. I haven't got switchover performing automatically. This is the manual testing I was referring to. But I can change that to, later to run, to be automatic. The host names, there's my fully qualified. This works in a work group, by the way. It doesn't have to be in a domain. It can work in the work group. I put fully qualified domain name in there so that you can see that it does work with fully qualified domain names. But it also works in a work group that's supported in that. And then what's going to happen with network traffic redirection? There's the DNS server, the IP addresses, etc. I'll minimize this before we run out of space. There is a live timeout. So what that means, there's that heartbeat that's going to continue between the replica and the master, the production server. Something happens, that's where we monitor the services, and we also do a network connection. That's how we're able to determine if it's time to fail over or not. Database management. I'll now look at the master itself. And we see pretty much the same thing. We see the host information, network traffic redirection, any database management, action upon success from any scripting that you want to have. And on the replica itself, this we see the root directories where it's writing to. So it does require SQL on the replica. Production and exchange and the replica node, they need to have the same version, in this case the same version of SQL, even down to the service pack or the cumulative updates. The pathing should be the same. That's what we recommend, highly recommend it. There's a lot more information I can go in here, the Arcserve tasks. This is about Arcserve backup. This is about the testing for assured recovery, etc. And we see the properties. So let me just go back to the statistics here, which should actually be bigger. But you can see in here on the statistics side, during replication, what's changed, how much have I got left to replicate, is everything up to date. It's also posted down the bottom here is that you've got, it's telling you everything's synchronized, and it's replicated, posting reports, and you can see the progress down here as well. So you can always see what's where that replication is at. So this is always the fun part. We're about to find out, will it fail over or not? So you can see in here that you right-click on the scenario, you can stop it, suspend it, do some replica integrity testing. So what that will do in terms of the replica integrity testing, and we can look at that now. We've got replication is alive, it's working, it's running, it's done the synchronization. So I can right-click here and pick replica integrity testing, or at the top here, I can pick from here the little grey, this little button up here, whichever you find more appropriate. There's a little bit of information about it. Action on success, take the snapshot, do any user-defined. I'm going to click OK. As this is a live demo, there's always some trepidation about whether this will be successful or not. Of course, if it isn't, we get errors and warnings coming up, which are quite useful. So down here, we see here, Replica has been suspended for integrity testing. It's now starting the SQL services on the replica. Production is still unaffected. The SQL server itself is still processing and running in production. Nothing's happened. And we've got this integrity testing. So as you can see here, it's successful. So services were started. The SQL services started up successfully. We're now stopping them again. So we just performed right here is where we performed a successful disaster recovery test. Had we failed over right now, would it have worked? Yes. It successfully started the services on the replica. It's stopping those services. And in a moment, once the SQL services are stopped, we'll get an update. And we see in here that after it stopped, it built a snapshot. Snapshot done. Created a snapshot. There's the ID. And SQL integrity testing is finished. As you can see, we're back to replicating again. As a quick look, I'll click on my snapshot view. I do expect to have a little error because this node it tries to connect to isn't there. I'll choose the replica node from the list, and there's the snapshots that are displayed from there. You can see I've done some over different times. You can right-click, mount it, whatever you want to do, delete it or refresh it. So right there is your means that that was a successful disaster recovery test. Excuse me. And you can mount that for a backup if you wanted to. All right, here comes the big test. So we're running, everything's working fine. Let's see, and we'll look at some of the little buttons that are across the top here. With a difference report, we back up. We can synchronize it. We can look at restoring data, differencing report between the production or the active and the standby node. But here's the little perform switchover button. I'm going to perform that switchover. It does ask two questions because, remember, this is a manual process that I'm choosing at the moment. I'm going to select, I've got a choice to wait until all journals are applied because this is a manual test. I don't have to wait because this is my test environment. And I'm going to elect not to run a reverse scenario so you can see it step by step through as the process. So coming down here, the integrity has finished testing. Let me click on this one for you so you can see what's happening. Posting the replica report. DNS successfully redirected. Remember, I didn't elect to run an automatic reverse scenario. So right here, it says that traffic successfully redirected. I can look in DNS and see now that my SQL server is now pointing to the replica. The switchover is completed. So I've known that's all worked. So now I'll manually restart the scenario. And we'll see a reverse scenario will be we'll see the SQL itself is in a reverse. I get this run. Apologies. What do you want to do? This little explanation here, the differences between these quickly. File synchronization, as you can see, is for a large number of small files, user data, etc. Block synchronization for large files like databases and applications. This offline sync is very unique. If you might want to perform replication, you've got the two nodes are local, but one of those nodes is now going to go off-site. So you can perform the replication, start that, disconnect that node, take it to the remote site, plug it in. When you're ready to go, it resumes. So there's more information about offline synchronization on our website. This is simply asking me to connect to the Arcserve backup host because we're able to further protect the scenario using Arcserve backup. So again, down here, the traffic's redirected. It started SQL services successfully on the replica node. The switchover is over completed. Had I prepared a little bit better, I could have shown you the SQL services for switchover and DNS. But I'm trying to keep the hands-on demonstration live a little bit shorter. So you can see here that on the replica node, services are started, and now the replica is doing the synchronization. You can see that it's going from the replica node back to the production node, so it's reverse. Synchronized is finished. I'm just going to wait for the is alive to appear so that the active node, which is the replica, is actively going to be monitoring the production server. Then I'm going to switch back. So this is the step-by-step process that I was mentioned earlier, is that you'll take this approach to make sure everything's working in order. It's replicating, the engines are talking, you can do an assured recovery test, the services come online, I do a manual switchover, and once I see this is alive, and I've got synchronization finished, it's in here, I'm just going to once more, I'm going to perform the switch back, if you like, and this time I am going to run a reverse replication scenario, which I didn't choose initially because I was stepping through everything. I'll choose yes. Now we'll see the updates appear down here. Actually, I should probably move that a little bit to make so you can see it all in there. And you can see today's date timestamp, so you know this is quite recent too, in 2014. There's the switchover. So I've got here stopping SQL services on the replica. They've all stopped. Stopping the scenario, but it says backward. So there's a hint to you that it's not production to replica, it's replica to production. And then from here, DNS successfully redirected to the master, traffic successfully redirected, starting the scenario, SQL service has started, it's alive, so we're back in business. So as you can see, that didn't take too long. That took about 10 minutes of your time today to watch that. As I stepped through a lot, I know I went through a lot of detail and a lot of information. Again, this is going to be recorded, and you might likely be rewinding to see things happen. The only thing missing is that I didn't switch to the DNS server to show the DNS update, and I certainly didn't switch to the SQL service so you could see where the SQL services, who was managing whom, etc. So that's pretty much it. I do have other scenarios in here. For Exchange, there's the full system, and content distribution, that's a means where if you've got some common files that need to be distributed out through the environment, that's a unique feature. There's also my service, other scenarios for Windows DFS and folders and so on, but I haven't got time to show those today. So getting close to where I should be wrapping up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave my lab and come back to the presentation screen. And I suppose I should just highlight this legal screen one more time. And again, you probably have questions about can you do this or can you do that. That was very limited with SQL 2012. Of course, all the latest versions of Microsoft products and operating systems are supported. The engine is a mini filter driver, so no reboot is required. I'm sure there's other questions that I can't think of right now that require answers, but contact your partner or your account manager, your Arcserve account manager, and get those questions. We have pre-sales engineers, we have support people. So just in summary, is that from the solution overview for Arcserve replication and high availability, in summary, you've got that continuous replication to protect your applications, databases, your files, your data, essentially your business data, your critical data. And perhaps with the critical, you've determined what really is critical. If today everything shut down, where is our money no longer coming from? We protect Exchange and SQL and Oracle. Linux, Unix can be protected as well. Hypervisors. You've got the automated testing. Although you saw me do it manually, I hope you understand why I did that step by step. Having now proved that my manual process is working, I'll then switch to automatic, and at some stage I'm going to perform an automatic task. I'm either going to force it, e.g. power off the production server or disconnect it from the network, or perform the push button as you saw me doing manually. So even though it's automated, you can still perform a manual task. Again, it supports physical to physical, physical to virtual, virtual to virtual, and virtual to physical. There's cluster support as well. I mentioned the data rewind capability, that bookmark. So you've got the continuous data protection. It supports attached storage, SAN, NASs, cloud storage, WANs, LANs, whatever the case may be. Same subnet, different subnet. And of course, you have the centralized management and reporting. So with that, I'm getting close, very close to wrapping up. Thank you very much for listening and watching. My name is Chris Evans. I'm with Arcserve, a principal consultant. A reminder, if you do have any further questions that you need answered, contact your Arcserve account, your Arcserve account manager, whoever that may be. If you have trouble knowing who is it I should talk to, just go to arcserve.com. All the information is on there, who to contact, who to reach out to. You can either connect with our chat people and support, and they can certainly get you connected as well. So if you don't know who, go to support, click on chat, we'll get you connected from there. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much for listening and watching and walking through. Everything worked, my fingers were crossed, everything worked quite well. And I'm sure you've probably had enough, but as I said, my name is Chris Evans. I'm based in Seattle, by the way. Don't let the Australian accent fool you. I am in the Pacific Northwest, in wonderful Seattle. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much for listening and for watching once again. And thank you for watching the Arcserve replication and high availability product walkthrough. Thank you and have a great day. Be safe.